So, before lunch we developed a logical model. After lunch we developed a physical model and sort of implemented it in the database. And then we went home for the night. Now it's next morning. And it's time to insert some data into our tables. Now you got to remember all the keys and fields and stuff like that. Just like we were inserting data from kind of like the outward simple things to the more central ones, we're going to do the same thing when we insert data, okay? And so we're using insert into, and this is a good time to point out that the keywords inside of SQL, like insert into, the case doesn't matter. The names of the tables, the names of the columns may or may not matter, and the actual data you put in, that's case sensitive because that's your data. So I'm going to type insert into artist. And the key thing that is important here is we're not specifying the ID field. So if you recall, in the artist table, we have an ID field and a name field. But if you look over here, the ID field is an auto-generated field. It's not really showing up very well because we don't have the type. So the ID field is auto-generated. So when I write this SQL, I don't need to specify the ID because as part of our contract, we made a contract with a database that says you assign that. So I'm going to run this now, insert into artist with a name of Led Zeppelin. And if then we browse data and we go look at the artist, it's added the number 1. Kind of predictable. You can kind of guess what the next one's going to be. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to insert another artist in, and we're going to insert AC/DC in, and we inserted that. Now, if we go take a look at data again, we got 2. And if we did a new record here, it would automatically provide this for us, right? And it would let us change this, but it would want to pick the next number 3. So what we've done here is both inserted the record, but we've also established for within this database a new number. 1 means Led Zeppelin, and 2 means AC/DC. Okay? So then, the next thing we're going to do is insert in the genre. We're kind of working outward in, and insert the value rock and the value metal. Now I'm going to show you a little trick here. You can actually, in this user interface of most of these things, not just this one, you can usually put more than one command in as long as you put a semicolon at the end of it. So I'm going to, if I did that right, semicolon in the end of it. So I'm going to do an insert into genre of rock and an insert into genre metal, and I'm going to run the SQL. Oh, I wonder if I did it twice. I did. So I'll just delete this record, goodbye, delete that record, goodbye. So I did 2 inserts and then I hit the button twice, so that's how I ended up with 2 copies of it. So rock, for the rest of this lecture, is the value 1, and metal is the value 2. And again, now when we're making the track table, we don't have to put rock, 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 rock. We just put 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Because 1 is not a string, but it's a number, that turns out to be okay. So now we're going to take a look at the album. And this is the first situation where we've got to do a primary key, a foreign key, right? So we got an album table, and the album has a primary key, which is going to be automatically generated for us, and a foreign key called artist ID, because the album points to the artist. And we only add data at the starting point of these arrows, and so that's what we're doing. So this one, we have to put in title, but we don't have to put in ID, so we don't have to put that in, but we do have to explicitly put in artist ID. So we insert into album, we're going to have a title, and then we're going to have an artist ID. This number, we have to remember that 2 was AC/DC and 1 was Led Zeppelin. Now when we're doing this by hand, it's a little tricky, and you find yourself flipping back and forth to remember, like, oh, which one was Led Zeppelin, which one was AC/DC? And it seems like in the short term it'd be easier just to put the string in, but that's the whole thing we're trying to avoid. Okay? So for foreign keys, we have to put the numbers in explicitly because we, or the code we write, has got to remember them. So remembering what these numbers are, the 2 and the 1, is a lot easier for a program to remember than it is for you to remember doing this by hand. Now normally, you wouldn't insert this stuff. We'll have code that inserts it, and it's real easy for it to say, oh, I just inserted genre, and I inserted rock, and I got back a 2. So that actually you can get that, and so you, the human, don't have to remember this. So let's run these. So this is our first one that's doing, and I'll put a semicolon here so we can do it all at once. And I'll only push the button once. Okay, and if we do browse data and we look at the album, the ID was auto-generated and artist ID was something that we chose and title was something that we put in. So now we're in pretty good shape. Now the last thing we're going to do is probably the most complex, but it's not. We have an ID's coming for free, title's data, length, rating, and count, that's just data, and then we have two arrows, right? Album, pointing to album and genre, album and genre. And so we have two foreign keys. Now here is where we have replication now. Those two are going to the same album. And these two are going to the same album. Same genre, same genre. It's okay to have replication as long as they're numbers. That's really the essence of what we've done. We just like went in the big circle, took replicated strings and turned them into replicated numbers. So these are okay. And so then what you're going to do is you're just going to take each of these rows that you know. Well, we don't need that. Clear. Take each of these rows, and you know most of the data. We're going to put in the title, we're going to put in the album ID, the length, the rating, the count, put all those things in explicitly. This comes automatically, and we're going to do that. Title, rating, length, count, album ID, genre ID. Then we have the values, and then we have, these are the two foreign key values, and they point to those rows. And again, this is a point in time where you sort of have written down on a piece of paper what these little numbers were if you were doing it by hand. It won't be too bad. I luckily have them cut and pasted, so they're all easy for me. And if you're following along, then you just cut and paste these guys. And I'll be super lazy, and I'll copy all four SQL statements and run them over here, paste them in, and then I am going to put a semicolon carefully, not on each line, but at the end of the values thing. So I'm putting a semicolon on each of these guys. You don't have to put a semicolon on the last one. And I'm going to hit the run, and I'm going to look at the data, and I'm going to look at the track data, and there we are. That's all there. I can kind of move this over. And that's the track data. And again, we specified all those things. So if you look at all these tables, we've constructed them outwardly in. We started like at the genre and the artist, and we worked our way in so that we could establish these numbers so that then we could link to those numbers as we put things in the album, and then we established numbers. And so the foreign keys are the starting points, the primary keys are the ending points, and we worked in. And so we have replication of numbers in this column, but we don't have replication of strings. So the word rock, if you look at all this data, okay, that's a bad example right there. Forget that. Pretend that. The word metal is better. That doesn't count. That's just a title. That's not really word rock. The word metal as a genre only appears once in the entire database. And the thing about it is, like, what if there were a million of these, right? 1 million. You say, okay, what's the difference? The word metal versus whatever, versus the number 2. If there's millions of them, it's not just that it takes up storage, it has to do with how much has to be scanned. So part of what we're trying to do in databases is reduce the amount of data that has to be scanned to get to a particular piece of information. And so the difference between metal, which might actually be 128 characters, and a number, which is actually 4 characters, that turns out to be different. And it's not we can't store it on disk drives. Disk drives are big. It's just that we can't scan past it fast enough. And we can't build indexes so we can jump past it even faster. Okay? So that's what we have achieved in this section, is we've inserted all these data and we've linked things together and we've modeled relationships and connection points rather than replicating data.